$86 million in a single year, multiple $30 million months, and all of that with a tire inflator. Today, I'm interviewing Andrew Payne.
There's always like a switch for us sometime in September or mid-October where sales are going from 50 to 100K a day, and then all of a sudden we shoot up to 800, a million, 1.5 million a day. I'm living at the computer 18 hours a day. It was all hands on deck basically every minute of Q4.
Andrew started back in 2005 with affiliate marketing and now runs a holding company of multiple e-commerce brands. And in the next 60 minutes, Andrew gives a look behind the scenes of what makes his main brand, Air Moto, so successful. We talked about the funnel setup that helped him get his average order value from $105 to $175. We also broke down how he's scaling to $30 million a month in Q4, his high season, and how he's managing the ad spend, the capital, and the stock.
Take your business serious. Be willing to work harder and to go into the trenches deeper than the next person. If you can do that and don't give up, you'll find your way.
He shared a lot of things that he's never shared publicly before, and I'm super excited to present this interview for you. Now let's get straight into the episode. Andrew, thank you so much for doing this. Thank you so much for joining. I was really excited to get you on an interview finally. I've known you for a couple of years now. I think we first met each other at one of Alex Fedottov's masterminds back then in New York in 2022. And since then, I've just seen you around the world at different masterminds, different events, and followed some of the stuff that you do online. And it's really cool to see the brands and the scale that you achieved over the years. And that's also why I wanted to do this interview with you. Because I really, just think you're a great operator, a really smart marketer, and I just want to extract some of your learnings, some of your mindset, and some of your strategies, and just give that to the audience. But before we really dive into all of the details, maybe you can just introduce yourself for people who are not yet familiar with you.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. My name's Andrew Payne. Our primary company is Creatunity. We set out about 5 years ago into e-commerce, started building a single brand, and since then we've evolved into a couple of brands and projects. But my core background started way back in 2005, the very early days of affiliate marketing. I did that for a number of years, also ran an agency for B2B clients for a handful of years as well, before ultimately reverting back into the affiliate space. And then after a period of time, I was looking for something with a little different direction, but complementing my skill sets on the marketing side. And that's when I chose to get into e-commerce. And we've been fortunate to work hard, and we've had a lot of success and scaled our primary brand very big, very quickly in the first several years. And that's allowed us to build a team of about 55 people, all remote, all over the world. And now we're operating a total of 3 brands, along with some SaaS and mobile application products.
Yeah, very cool. Thank you for giving the background. And I mean, we do have some mutual friends like Merrick and some other people, and they always speak very highly of you. And one of the brands that we can talk publicly about, the ones that you operate, is Air Moto, right? So for some of the people, I mean, you built this into a pretty big company, right? Doing sometimes 30 million in a single month, which is super impressive. The one thing that I want to get into here is that a lot of people, they're doing dropshipping or brands or whatever, they always try to find like sexy products. They want to do supplements, health awareness, consumables, skincare, right? What I think is really interesting about this case, that you were able to scale this as a direct-to-consumer brand to like mid and high 8 figures per year in run rate, with a quote-unquote unsexy category or an unsexy product. So first of all, I want to understand what made you personally go for that niche or that product that you're selling, and how were you able to make it work?
Yeah, and I agree. A lot of times people get attached to the sexier categories, beauty, health, supplements, things like that. I can't say that I was super strategic in the beginning. I basically, coming from the affiliate space, I worked with a number of companies like DFO and Giddy Up, who essentially had e-commerce affiliate products. So I was already working with some of those as an affiliate. So when I chose to get into e-commerce, I just did some research, kind of shortlisted a handful of products, There was another small brand running a similar product as Airmoto is in the tire inflator space. They'd been around for about a year. They weren't too big. But in my research, I could just determine based on their marketing, I was very confident that I could do better than what they were doing. So Airmoto, or what became Airmoto, was the third product that I tested at that time, and I was just able to get momentum very quickly. At that moment, I didn't realize, some of the negatives. That yes, I knew it's not the most sexy product, but I didn't realize how seasonal influenced it was. I guess I didn't realize also how difficult it would be to try to market it throughout the year, where it was much easier. We later learned throughout Q4 as a gift. But as time went on, and we started to really test and figure things out, I began to understand what the strengths are of going after a product category that's not as sexy or has some of the seasonal challenges. And so at that point, we were so deep into things, all we could do is lean into the strengths that it did offer. And one of those strengths is that because it's not the easiest, we also have had very minimal competition over the years, outside of Amazon at least. So that gave us, a little bit of an advantage. And I think ultimately, any category you get into, whether it's the sexier type or the unsexy type, you need to be thoughtful about what are the strengths and weaknesses both of that category and product type, as well as yourself and your skill sets. And sometimes even an unsexy product, if there's enough advantages, you're a first mover, you have enough resources and capital and expertise on the marketing to figure out how to make it work. It can be still be a very successful approach.
Yeah, very interesting. And I think there's a couple of different sections that I want to dive into this interview. So first of all, I want to ask you some follow-up questions around niche, seasonality, and how you actually manage that. And then secondly, what I think is also pretty interesting, like how you were able to basically build your, let's call it, marketing, paid acquisition, and funnel team, right? In terms of the specific marketing strategies, the funnel strategies. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that we can dive into there. And then at the end, I also want to get your view on, I mean, you were able to somewhat build a team that's able to have one successful main brand, but then also duplicate some form of winning formula across different brands, right? So at the end, I will also ask you some questions around like your operator mindset and especially the leadership type. But first of all, and I mean, you already mentioned that Airmoto and that business is super, super seasonal, right? So maybe you can dive a bit deeper in terms of just so people understand of like, if you look at the year and like 80-90 million in yearly revenue, like how big that seasonality is and that roller coaster, and like how much it centralizes around Q4. So first of all, maybe that just to give an insight. And then secondly, like what is the red tail that people don't understand in terms of inventory, cash flow management, in terms of all of the things that are associated with seasonality, but that you have been able to crack with this business?
Yeah, no, for sure. So in terms of the first question in seasonality, the last couple of years we'll do roughly 70% of our revenue in the last 3 months. So in Q4 is basically 70% of our year, and that includes our D2C and Amazon combined. In the beginning, I think it's always been about like that, but as we've gotten stronger with and understood the strategy behind Airmoto, we've just continued to lean into one of its strengths, which is that it is seasonal. So if we're going to shoot our shot, that's the period of year that we want to make the biggest swing. Obviously, there's additional risks with that, but there's also potential rewards with that as well. The first year, though, I didn't really quite know that. When I launched this product, it was mid-January, so I was kind of coming off the tail end of the prior Q4, and I was getting my feet wet, so it was just myself. I didn't have really a team at that time. But with the momentum we had, or that I had, I did around 1 million in sales in just under 90 days. So for me, that was a win. My first goal was just to get momentum and get revenue coming in, and then start to improve and build things all around that. as we entered the end of Q1 that first year, I really started to see sales drop off significantly and become much harder to market the product and get the acquisition that we needed. But I also hadn't done a lot of funnel testing. We were still running basically the same few dozen ads at that time. So this is about 5 years ago, before
Yeah.
Andromeda, when you could get away with fewer quantity of ads. So I started to work on increasing my AOV. That was really the first major step, and then getting a little bit better process of new creatives into the mix on a more regular basis. And so after a few months, started adding in a couple of people to the team to help support tickets and stuff like that for the support side. Was able to have some strong wins and got our AOVs up quite a bit. So that first year was really focused around what's the biggest improvements I can make in the shortest period of time. That being said, I'd already committed also around the end of Q1 to $1 million purchase order for inventory, and it was shortly after that when sales really started getting difficult. So I kind of got myself into a position where either I make it work and make money, or I don't make it work and I lose money. So it's do or die in a sense. And I think that's also something that has to be factored into anyone's decision on what category and space they're getting into. There's varying levels of difficulty and competitiveness. And even if you see how to make it work, oftentimes if you don't have enough capital in the pipeline to buy you the time it takes to improve, and to get things dialed in, you still can fail. So fortunately, I was able to push through and make it work. But even that first year, we did about 5 million revenue, but we lost a couple $100,000 by the end of the year. But what worked well was that in Q4, I started to see for the first time what kind of energy the full Q4 period has. And that really helped to kind of bring us much closer to break even that first year. So when the year closed and we were about $200,000 down on 5 million in sales, even though we lost money, the way I looked at it was that I'm still just figuring out the full e-commerce operations and still getting the team figured out. And there was still a large number of ideas that I had to test on the brand. So I considered it a win. All I needed was just a few percentage points improvement, and we would already be breaking into profitability. So based on that, just continue to improve our team, got better operational support, flew to China that next year on the second year, renegotiated terms across everything. So that helped improve margin. Just started optimizing as many areas as I could to get our margin stronger and stronger.
Yeah.
And then once we, were approaching Q4, we decided to lean into that first year of learnings, and we purchased significantly more inventory. So that second year, we did $16 million, and we had very healthy margins. Again, most of that performance driven by Q4, and so that's where we started to have a second year of data points to understand what actually made improvements, and that our strategy was starting to work and it wasn't just theory. And then so it kind of compounded further upon that in the future years. And then going to your second point, it does complicate things when you have a highly seasonal business, and obviously you can control it, meaning you don't have to lean into it as aggressively as we chose to. This comes down to your risk tolerance, your stress level tolerance, as well as your capital. But the way we saw it was that, we have things working, and we want to take as much of that gamble while we can see things are still strong, because things do change year by year. Like, what happens if tariffs had started to be impacting things at that point? It would have hurt margins. But so we just continued to lean into it. However, it does complicate cash flow and planning of inventory, because now we're getting to much larger purchase orders where there's 4, 5, 600,000 units, and the manufacturers need not just 30 or 45 days to produce that, but they need, 60 to 90 days because they have to organize the raw materials from their suppliers, and then start to do production for us. And then we have to have the shipping and timing it all right to show up here in the US warehouses in a reasonable period of time. But then also that means 70% of your inventory is Q4. And so now 70% of your buying is Q4. So cash started to become a bigger challenge as well. We had to start getting a bit creative. Fortunately, we still had reasonable access to some capital between myself and my external partnership. And then we had the profits from the second year to help roll into it as well. But we negotiated, a little bit better payment terms. We opened up credit lines to have backups just in case we got into a pinch. We opened up a Meta credit line so we could switch spend to the Meta credit line and keep at least a period of time where we have capital freed up. In particular, because Amazon has a 2-week delay payout. So as our sales grew there during Q4, that also complicates when you get your money back. It's really hard to explain how someone can be prepared for that. You have to really just kind of go through it and figure it out. And because we were really, all of our sales has mostly been based around one product, it allowed me to focus on planning strictly around that for the most part, versus a brand that might have a few dozen core products that they're pushing throughout the Q4. That does complicate cash flow as well. Obviously, there was even periods of time where in Q4 we're oversold. So we have inventory that will arrive, in a week, but sales are very strong. We're wanting to maximize the momentum, not, reduce campaign budgets or turn them off. So we would just have to find a balance with what's the tolerance that we're willing to push so that customers might not be getting their product in 3 to 5 days. It might be more like 7 to 10 days. We found out that if it's much further than that, then the number of issues and chargebacks went up super significantly. So those kind of things that we had to figure out in those first 3 years really kind of gave us a lot of those lessons. And then our fourth year was our largest year so far. We did 86 million. So both November and December are very sizable months. We're talking that fourth year was like 28 million for November and 29 million for December. So when you're dealing with that level of sales in such a short time, everything has to be like perfect. Because if there's even one thing messed up, it's you're losing quite a bit of money or the opportunity of earning money. And there's always like a switch for us sometime in September or mid-October where sales are going from 50 to 100K a day, and then all of a sudden when things really start to work, we shoot up to 800, a million, 1.5 million a day in sales at times. And that's a pretty significant increase because we're leveraging Checkout Champ for our sales funnels. We have to make sure that we have enough support staff to handle such a huge increase as well. So there's a lot of thought process that you have to go through it to ensure everything is ready for that level of demand and for that demand to change so rapidly in a period of time. In addition to the cash flow and inventory planning, because if that's not set up, then you don't even have the opportunity to push that hard. And during those periods of time, pretty much I'm living at the computer 18 hours a day. Not as bad the last 2 years because we have a much bigger team and more responsibility is diversified. But the first 3 years, yes, it was all hands on deck basically every minute of Q4. And that's also not always easy for everyone to do, to take it that serious. You might even have family and kids and things that factor into it, but I knew that this is the period of time that we make money, and I wanted to ensure that we put ourselves in the best position to do so. But yes, there's a lot that goes into it.
Yeah, very cool. And that's also like one of the main reasons why I was so excited to speak to you and just get your perspective on this, because I think it's such a unique business model, especially in the direct to consumer world, right? Where most people, it's like some form of linear increase of scale, maybe anything from like 10 to 100% month on month, depending on the niche day and everything. And from you, it goes, yeah, as you just said, from sometimes around 1 to 3 million a month to then 28, 30 million a month, which is a
it's pretty big increase,
huge scale. So that's very interesting. Before we dive into the next section of like funnels and specific marketing strategies, the last thing I want to ask you on that, what have you found was the biggest positive impact on managing that quick scale up and to get the most out of that seasonality? Because from my perspective, just looking at the numbers and understanding the amount of spend it requires, the amount of inventory it requires, and like capital management, it's huge, it's insane. I don't know if people directly understand like the numbers that are associated with that and like how your credit cards are burning through spend every single day in that period. Like, what would you say would be maybe the biggest lever for that from your perspective?
It's definitely hard to sum it up to just a biggest or a few biggest levers, but um, I mean, I think cash flow and confidence in your strategy is important. I think to get to that kind of level for, especially for individual months, meaning it's different if we were running at that scale all year round, because then things are much more stable. So planning is easier. But when you are going from, a couple of million a month to those much larger numbers for a few months, um, you're also taking a bit of a chance that, okay, maybe something's changed in the market, maybe there's new competition, maybe we can't get sales there. And those kind of moments have happened where things were not working right the way that we expected. But I think for me, that the biggest lever was we took it step by step over the first several years. So this is also a negative of a seasonal business, is that you're basically betting on winning the year on just a small period of time, but you're also primarily learning from any lessons from a small period of time. So we make plans all year to improve and to crush Q4, but we have some wins, we have some losses, but we don't know what those are until Q4. So your cycle of learning is a little slower because now you have to plan going into next year. Some of it's theory, some of it's what you think is the best. Sometimes something wasn't prepared right and you lost like 2 weeks of downtime or lower scale. That could have been a much better Q4 for you, but you didn't figure that out until the end of the year. And then you can only apply that and hope to see it in 4 more quarters from now. So it's that's also a difficult thing. It forced me to have to be a bit more patient. And not so short-sighted and wanting just quick wins. But I think just being confident in your strategy and tactical, and I'm a very deep, sometimes overthinker, so I kind of triple check basically everything, and especially our numbers. But to be honest, I really don't know an easy way to answer that question. It's something that would probably have a whole hour of conversation in and of itself. But I would just say, don't bite off more than you can chew. The way that we do evaluate things is always based on risk. You don't want to ever put yourself in a position where if things don't go as planned, it wipes you out and you got to start from scratch. You want to make sure that you plan best case scenario as well as worst case scenario, and ensure that you're prepared for both outcomes.
Yeah, very cool. And I think this also leads a bit into the next section where I want to dive more specifically into how you set up your whole paid acquisition team. So meaning everything around creatives, media buying, different audiences, and then also specifically the funnel. So maybe first of all, you can give us like a high level overview of your strongest channel. How do you set it up? Like, what does your acquisition look like for Airmodo in Q4?
Yeah, it's evolved over the years for sure. We see consumer patterns changing, especially now that we've been running at such scale for several years. People are more familiar with this product type, where the first few years it was very new to a lot of people. And especially in the off season, Q1 through Q3, the first several years, the use of advertorials and kind of positioning story based, interest and curiosity was a great approach for us because it allowed us to help the consumer understand when this type of product is useful. At the end of the day, people really don't care much or think about their tires, certainly tire pressure. But there's always those moments where you're like, dang, now I need air. Where can I get it? Or you have to call a tow truck or some roadside service. And so getting people to understand, more of this is an emergency situation you don't want to put yourself in. So there was a bit of education involved, which is always a more expensive way of marketing. But again, this is one of the edges that we had. Others weren't able to do it as well. And so that gave us a bit of a runway. But yeah, we tested a lot of stuff, starting off with advertorials, sales pages, upsells, etc. We were doing pre-purchase upsells, post-purchase upsells. And we've done literally hundreds of different types of ideas of tests over the last few years. And there's certain tests that we will repeat once or twice a year, or introduce new ideas as we see things are changing in the marketplace. One thing that we started to see the last couple of years in Q4 in particular was that the advertorial flow wasn't working as best. Typically the shorter flow, still keeping it informative, making it a bit more visual and almost interactive, or just a lot more movement and engagement, but keeping the flow shorter started to be much more impactful. We also removed the pre-purchase upsells that we had. We found that they were just becoming a small distraction. So while the take rate was strong, overall conversion rate was being impacted. So we moved all that to the post-purchase side. Oftentimes for this kind of gadget product also, you'll tend to see websites that'll have like buttons for 1, 3, or 1, 2, or 3 quantities, maybe a couple of more. We did a lot of testing, and specifically in Q4, there's people that are buying many more gifts than just 2 or 3, and we wanted to keep the friction as low as possible. So if they needed 5 or they needed 7, they can just push a button and it's already selecting that quantity for them. So we offer quite a few more options that are single click button options than most brands typically do, because we found through testing that if they have to click a drop down box to select quantity, they're just generally not going to do that. So there was a lower AOV. Conversion rate was very similar, but AOV was really the main impact there. And then that by approaching it that way, we also have a bit more of an advanced flow on our post-purchase side, meaning if they selected they want to buy 5 air motos in the front end, then all of the upsells on the post-purchase side automatically have the same quantity as their original purchase. So if we offer them our power kit or a carrying case or whatever it might be, again, they don't have to select quantity. They just click yes or no. But if they click yes, they get 5 carrying cases automatically. And that kept friction low, and it also kept AOV high, which gave us very strong margin boost because our post purchases, kind of my general rule of thumb is I want our post purchases to all be 90% plus margin, whereas our front end offer is not always the case. So we've just done so many different things. We've ran on many different channels. Meta's always been our most dominant channel. Like I mentioned earlier, we do use Checkout Champ, so we even have every channel segmented by its own funnel, so we can have true clarity of sales attribution and not just base it only on UTM parameters and other data from the Meta dashboard and such. We have our own custom, media buy reports that combine Meta's reported data with our own internal reported data, because that way we can see data in a bit more real time, especially during those high velocity periods of Q4. Meta tends to have a 3, 6, 12-hour delay in updating attribution, and that's not really that's flying a little too blind when you're spending, you know, 400 or 500K a day on ad spend. You need something that's a bit more fresh, recurring than that. So we've just done a number of those kind of steps just so we can constantly be confident, constantly find ways to improve. You know, we've ran with AppLovin for the last 2 years. It was much stronger for us the first 12 to 14 months it came out. We still run there, but I think competition also on the auction base there has just gone up as well, and so things are not as strong for us there. But we do Google, YouTube. We've done native traffic at times. We've done some TikTok. We do some organic stuff as well. We have a couple affiliate partnerships. Obviously, we lean into email marketing and things like retention and ad shopper. So we have a number of small things that we've built out just to kind of retain margin and strengthen our efforts as much as possible.
Yeah, makes sense. And there were a lot of gold nuggets that you just mentioned. One pattern that I think is interesting of hearing you speak and like analyze everything is that you talk a lot about data and experimentation and iteration. And I think there's a lot of good marketers nowadays where they can really quickly go from 0 to 1, whether it's a new landing page, new offer, new creative. Yeah. But then I think there's like this one skill set missing where you then push it live, you look at data, you get insights from the data, you come up with an idea, and then you set up a split test, and then you keep iterating and keep making it better. And you just said that you have ran hundreds of tests over the years, and I mean, I also see it on our side where we sometimes run 150, 200 split tests a month across like all of the different brands, and there's certain like processes and certain patterns, and it's like so interesting because a lot of times I also feel that me or even the brand owner, they think something is working just because you think it's that, and then you push it out to the market and then you get negative feedback from the market. So I'm just super curious to hear your perspective on what does your ideation and experimentation process look like? How do you look at data? How do you come up with ideas? How do you impact rate them? And how do you then test it and validate it basically?
Yeah, obviously it depends on the stage that you're at with the brand, but just kind of maybe a quick flow from the beginning of getting something off the ground. Um, so let's say that you launch a product and you have, you know, a landing page, sales page, checkout, and some post purchases. Generally, what we do is we'll do 1 or 2 rounds of testing on the initial landing page. Then we'll take the best, go to do 1 or 2 rounds of testing on the sales page. 1 or 2 rounds of testing next on the checkout. So we do it in stages, but we do it considering pre-purchase and post-purchase experience. So because post-purchase is already high intent, you know, buyers, they've already confirmed, it's very easy just to look at the data. So we'll oftentimes run one pre-purchase and one post-purchase experiment at any given time. And then once we've gone through, you know, landing page, sales page, checkout, then we'll go back to the beginning and do another round of that. And once we've done 2 rounds of it, and generally in these first 2 rounds, we're looking for the way we approach the test is as diversified of ideas as possible. So maybe it's quiz flow versus sales page, quiz flow versus 6 reasons why versus advertorial versus a short version of a landing page, but that's a bit of a advertorial. So we want to test all the varieties and see what stands out the most, so we know where to dive a bit deeper on the second round. But this way here, you're making as many quick wins in those first round or two as you can. And then you start getting much more granular from there. So that's where like heat maps and time on page and interaction points and drop-offs and stuff like that start to factor in a bit. But generally, you know, what I'm looking for is we have certain established benchmarks. They do vary a bit by brand and category. But where I've seen the most or the largest performance improvements tend to be at the moment the consumer has made the decision in their mind that, okay, I want to purchase this. So that's generally on the sales page. So everything that they have to select as options, so whether it's quantity or, you know, what's the shipping time, etc. Anything from that stage that you know the person's ready to buy and their next action is to make some selection or interaction with your landing page, that point forward or that point through checkout is generally where we found the biggest gains, whether it be conversion rate or AOV improvements. That's generally where we see it. Obviously, there's other things like the way you structure the offer and buy one, get one, or things like that. Those also are meaningful, but that kind of fits into that space as well, because that's their decision time. They see the price point, they see the offer. But sometimes it's even about how you structure the call to action button. We don't spend a lot of time testing like the colors, for example, but the wording is very impactful at times. Putting some urgency or like estimated arrival times that are actual live updated times, things like that are very big and big impact. Obviously, almost all the traffic these days from the platforms are mobile, so you want to ensure that you're really, really dialed in on the design, layout, and flow on mobile. Those areas are super impactful.
Yeah, very cool. And from your perspective, I mean, you just talked about a lot of different like funnel types and like the architecture and the flow of the funnels.
Yeah.
Is there one general funnel type that you have seen the most success with, right? Because I think sometimes people are overwhelmed with the possibilities of quiz funnel, holistic funnel, long form advertorial, VSL, like all of these different types, and they can do everything. Is there one funnel type that you just across the board see the most performance with?
Most often, it's either an advertorial, although that's been changing the last 2 years as advertorial usage has gone up in the industry a bit. I think consumers are seeing those story based a lot more. So while they're effective, maybe not as effective as they were in prior times. Consumers' attention spans are really low. So instead of having advertorial sales page checkout, just cutting out the advertorial and building a bit more information or story driven architecture into the sales page and keeping the flow a bit shorter, we're starting to see more brands doing very well with that. I still see listicle style stuff working across many brands, but I think if you really dive into the high scale brands, it's the simpler, more direct, clearly communicated, but with the right message. Those are some of the patterns, at least, that we're seeing. I can't say it's all tied to just a specific, page type. Quiz flows are still working very strong, especially in the health and beauty sectors. So I think the sector you're in also greatly influences what you're doing. I would just caution you that if all the competitors in your space are using quiz flows, you should certainly test them, but don't limit yourself. Be sure you test everything else, because I find that most people are pretty lazy and you might find some nuggets.
And another aspect that you also touched upon earlier was front-end offer, back-end offer, pre-purchase upsells, post-purchase upsells. I'm very curious because I've seen and tested a lot of different variations. Like, what is your winning combination right now in terms of the whole architecture of the front-end offer and then all of the post-purchase upsells to like really maximize the AOV you have?
Yeah, again, I think it depends a little bit. Obviously, there's no like one size fits all in this area, but the way I approach it is that since we're focused on selling usually single products, we want as little friction as possible until they've actually confirmed that purchase. So we're not, adding in a bunch of like pre-purchase stuff or add this and get free shipping. We're not doing a lot of that most of the time, which you do see that more so on Shopify store brands. And while we use Shopify, most of our acquisition is through the custom funnels that we build. And most of the products that we focus on generally they're skewed to where people tend to need more than just one, so that helps automatically on the AOV. The way you structure the offer, whether you say like price for each, or you give the total price, or whether it's buy one get one, that's an area that obviously can be tested on the core offer. On the post-purchase side, we had in the past, as an example, when we were offering the pre-purchase upsells, it was basically upselling a power kit and a warranty. And we had our post-purchase flow split based on their decision on that pre-purchase. So let's say they did not choose to purchase on the front end, then their first upsell on the back end was basically the same product, the power kit, without the warranty at a slightly lower price. And so that means we were able to expose the same product to the same consumer, but slightly positioned differently, slightly cheaper. We broke them apart, and that really strengthened our margin because for the ones that I forget exactly, but something like 30% were taking the pre-purchase and 70% were not. And you know, a warranty is basically no cost until you have to actually replace or address the unit later, which is a very small percentage of people. So mostly it was like our power kit, which we were selling for, I think, $25 on the post purchase, and it cost us $2. So margin's very, very high. So when we
Yeah.
split it up like that, we ended up getting an additional 25% of those that chose not to get it on the front end. We got them on the back end. So overall, roughly 50% of our customers were getting a power kit, which had a very significant impact to our margin because it's a very high margin item. So we did a lot of advanced splits. So we just show completely different flows on the back end based on front end decisions. Right now, we're not doing it exactly that way. We're doing more so we're aligning, like I mentioned earlier, the exact quantities that they're purchasing on the front end with the back end. It's a pretty lengthy post purchase we have. We have I think 3 upsells, but the first 2 also have downsells. So there's like 5 potential steps that someone can go through before they actually achieve the order confirmation page. Something you should also have to evaluate that people don't is sometimes you're being too aggressive on your post-purchase pages, meaning like you're making it very difficult to move on to the next step by making the no option less visible or more difficult to find. And what people don't track oftentimes is that, well, how many people are just completely closing out the page and walking away and never actually getting to see the other post-purchase upsells that you have. So you might think your first post-purchase is great and the rest of them suck, but it's because you're just hiding the option to move forward too much.
Yeah.
And if you don't pay attention to that, you're actually losing margin quite a bit. So there's always a balance to find with how you position and structure things, and ultimately it comes down to just strategically and methodically testing in that way.
Yeah, very interesting. And I think, again, it's what you just ended up saying. You have to test it, right? And I think what you also mentioned earlier is that in the earlier days, you could get away with just a small quantity of creatives. And now, just because you said testing, that came back to my mind. How did everything change for you guys? Because I know that you have a really strong in-house creative production team as soon as the Andromeda update came. Like, what does your creative process look like? How many creatives are you shipping and testing? Maybe take us through that, especially for you guys being so centralized around like 2 strong months. I can just imagine that needs to be a lot of ads to sustain that ad spend and not have any fatigue early.
Yeah, surprisingly, in Q4 for Airmoto, we don't experience fatigue too much. Our main goal really is figuring out what's working best as early as we can so we can expand as many creatives around those areas as possible so we can just reach greater scale. But once things are working, they tend to work for almost a full Q4, if not completely the whole quarter. And then some of those carry into Q1 as well. But for Airmoto in particular, now that we have several years of data, we understand what is the general 5 or 6 key angles that work for us throughout the year. There's always a handful that work best. And there's always new ideas and approaches that are trendy ideas that come up. So generally, we start in September really mapping out and planning ideas, shooting custom content around those ideas. Obviously, we're leveraging AI tools as well for some of this stuff that is simpler. And then we begin testing. We start in mid-August and we start testing by usually mid-September. Not significant volume, but 50 to 100 ads a week. Really just kind of aggressively trying to see what stands out and what's working right away and not waste time with anything that's not. And then as we're kind of working through these ads that we've prepared, we obviously will introduce new ideas that we discover that other brands are maybe leaning into for the holidays, because there are sometimes some unique holiday or promotional approaches. And then as we start to see what's working best, we start to dive into more ideas and iterations around those, go and shoot more content around those, get more UGC, leverage more AI now, just so that we have a huge pile of ads just ready for us to start to ramp up. And then we progressively will step up, and usually by early November, we're doing 200 to 300 ads a week. So quite a few ads, but there's also a higher success rate during this time for us. So there's more ads sticking, and so we're generally ramping up volume to try to progressively get our ad spend scale up very high. Our other brands that we operate are not as seasonal. So this is kind of going back to how our team operates a bit. We do kind of shift our attention a little bit throughout the year, depending on workload and where the most effective use of our time is. So going into Q4 or late Q3, the team starts to put a little bit more attention solely around Airmodo. We keep the other brands operating, but we're not trying to necessarily scale them to the max unless they're showing that potential. But because they're not as seasonal, we don't typically see that. And then once we get towards December 1st, we already really have all the ads and everything working as well as we need to for Airmodo. So the team starts shifting most of their attention back to planning and working on the other brands, and that's where they can kind of offset their time throughout the year. And then we've been slowly developing, kind of a pod system in a way for these brands, where we have certain parts of it that's centralized, mainly around the creative strategy and decision making. But when it comes to the copywriting and execution with editors and such, those are really more the pod sectors. And so those are responsible for specific brands.
Yeah, very interesting. And I think that also takes me a bit into the next question is, what is your approach? And I really like to ask this question. What is your approach to building a high-performing team? Because I think that's like one of the main things that a lot of e-com brand operators struggle with at some point, is that they realize that they are the bottleneck of the growth of the business, and they try to start figuring out team and leadership and hiring people. So with you have a huge portfolio of brands doing 9 figures, and you have a huge team. Like, how do you approach building a high-performing team in-house?
Yeah, kind of again, not another easy question. I will say there's generally like two paths that I see, and I went the first path. The first path is you're being super efficient. You're a little bit, reserved on just spending on hiring talent that maybe has experience. Because even if they have experience and you're paying them more, it doesn't necessarily mean they have experience or the right experience. So there's risks with that approach. So generally the first few years, until I got much more confident with our strategy, I was very involved in all areas of the team. I would hire the best that I could afford at that time. And then periodically we do performance reviews to see how they're operating. And then we either remove them and replace them, or continue to invest into their growth as we see fit. More recently, as we've been expanding into other brands, we're doing approach 2 now, which is really spending quite a bit of time looking for the right talent, being a bit more liberal with our budgets so that we're very competitive to attract better talent. And we're just holding them to a higher standard. So if we're not getting the results out of them in a reasonable period of time, we just don't hang on to them too long. But because we have a bit more budget to work with and cash flow is not as tight, we're able to take bigger risks on hiring that more experienced talent. And that's what's helping me specifically to delegate, not to worry as much about how the brands are doing and that they're making good decisions behind those. We just have a large number of reports, both for different people within the team, but also for myself where I can see at the brand level and channel level and other things for individual brands. And then we also have it rolled up where we can see how the company overall, including all brands and such, are operating. So I can measure things daily, weekly, monthly, and see how we're trending or where the big issues are. Is there big spikes in CPMs on a particular brand, et cetera, et cetera. And so I'm really more so just kind of revisiting the members of the team that are making decisions if I see things are getting off course. And then if I see bigger issues, then I'll spend a bit more time for 1 or 2 months with that area of the team until we figure out what the issues are and how to adjust either processes or strategy to get things going the way we want them to. But generally, I would imagine many people are starting from more of option one where they don't have a lot of budget to work with. I just advise you to hire as best you can and to hire someone that just knows a particular area better than you know, but then just confirm that they're performing within like a 90-day period.
Yeah, very interesting. I think just
And
looking
you
at
and I will always be the bottleneck. There's no way to solve that problem, unfortunately.
yeah. And just looking at the time a bit, I do have some like last questions just to close up this interview. So, and you just gave a pretty interesting outlook on like team and bottleneck and everything. So for me, what's interesting is what are you focusing your time on right now as like the business leader and the founder, and what do your next couple of years look like?
Yeah, mostly what I've been focused on, especially the last 18 months, we have a team that's operating very well for the most part without me, or at least majority of the time without me. So I'm able to really think a bit more about where do we want our company to go. I think the way I look at it is how do we continue to grow, but grow with a more sustainable approach than just being solely dependent on a seasonal brand, which is why we've expanded into other brands. And I'm very involved in picking what new categories that we get into. So I have members of my team that will do research based on me asking them to go and explore a certain area or collect certain data, and then I will review that data, make decisions. That would be more at the company level, where are we going and how do we get there over the next couple of years. But I also work very closely with my team leadership and managers to try to identify how can we be more efficient, how do we support them better, how do we train them better, how do we monitor and measure their performance better. Ultimately, how do we just maintain a very strong, well-refined team, and ensuring that they're leaning into the next technologies or the next strategies well. There's what we found oftentimes is people start doing their work and they'll get focused on their work, but they don't spend enough time to develop their own skills because things are changing so rapidly. So I ensure that my leadership is keeping pressure and defining agendas with those members of the team.
For people listening, right, we've covered a lot of ground in this interview. We've went through a lot of different sections. If they could only take one thing away from the last hour and everything that you've shared, what would be it?
Take your business serious. Be willing to work harder and to go into the trenches deeper than the next person. If you can do that and don't give up, you'll find your way.
Very cool. Then, Andrew, this has been a pleasure. Thanks so much for your time. For people who want to connect with you and reach out to you, what's the best way that they can connect with you and where can they find you?
You can find me on X at Real Andrew Payne. You can also find me on LinkedIn and Instagram at Live Dreams Loud. I'm not super active on social, but I do check it periodically. And we are always evaluating new team members, specifically in creative and copy areas and editing areas. But also more recently, we're evaluating more operational support to help grow and operate the number of brands. So if you think you might be a fit, feel free to reach out and we'll take a look.
Very cool. Then I will make sure to put those socials underneath so they can find you. And then thanks so much for your time and thank you for jumping on.
Anytime, my friend. Cheers.